There we go.
All right, well, at least this part of the conversation will get recorded. That's good. Thanks, Teresa.
So do you want me to show the standard now, or do you want me to, you want to keep going? You want to show the standard? Okay. Okay, so these are the comments that we got from you guys in a, I got an email on December 14th. I don't know exactly when the review happened at the NRC meeting, but I got an email forward with these comments. You guys would like to see the 24 deep or the 24-inch root barrier on all sides removed, and you wanted to see a root barrier flush with the sidewalk at 18 inches, minimum 10 length on centered tree trunk. So I think that's what you guys are showing here. You would like an 18-inch that spans 10 feet, which would be more or less 2 sidewalk panels. Here you also wanted to create a soil berm that was 3 inches, 3 to 5 inches higher than the top of the root ball or the tree center at the backfill. And then this placement of the root barrier from the back of the curb of the impervious surface, you guys cut that out of the 12 inches. And then there was a note here that says root ball to rest on pedestal of compacted subgrade to prevent settling. So that's just ensuring that the root ball gets planted on some type of compacted subgrade so that it's not going to settle and cause any type of issues. And then install root barrier flush against paving edge set 1.5 above finished grade. Do not wrap panels around root ball or impede normal root growth. So these are all the questions, all the notes that you guys had for us. We had an internal meeting with our street department and our development department. And we did a review of the standards. I'm sorry, let me make this smaller. Okay, so we did our own internal review. This is just dated for today, but we had one like a week ago, where we are still looking for the 24-inch commercially engineered root barrier. We will not, this is kind of trying to incorporate your notes with what we've seen in the field in construction and some of the issues that we feel we need to protect. So we want a 24-inch root barrier for protection, because generally our street sections are 18 inches in depth, and we want to make sure that we're protecting the compacted dirt and the curb and the asphalt well. So that's why we are doing a 24-inch root barrier there. The other reason why we have it at 12 inches from the back of curb is because generally when we're building roads, the compacted subgrade generally extends about a foot behind that curb, so that the curb has the structural stability on the backside to not settle or anything like that. So that's why we're going 12 inches off of the back of curb. And that's why we would like the 24 inches. Our old standard, as you see here, said all sides. In this new standard, we will be setting the root barrier 12 inches from the back of curb or impervious surface, and shall extend 20 feet from centered with the tree base along impervious surface only. So we will be extending 20 feet along the curb at each curb side, at 12 inches behind the curb, it'll be extended 20 feet. And then on the sidewalk side, again, it will be 12 inches off of the sidewalk and it will be extended for 20 feet. And this is for the typical development tree landscape zone, which is 5.5 feet. For the note that said a 3 to 5 inch berm, what we've accommodated is a note of placing the root crown. The root trunk collar should be flush to 1 inch above finished grade or landscape area planters. Finished grade shall be flush with top of curb, finished sidewalk, or at grade of landscape areas. So the root barrier should, or this root, the root trunk should be flush with the finished grade of the sidewalk or the top of curb. And then we will be placing 2 inches to 4 inches of unsettled bark mulch to accommodate that 2 to 5 inch or 3 to 5 inch berm that was being asked for. We're going to denote that a little bit better and show it a little bit better on the drawing. This is just a first time write-up that we had. The other note that you guys had was the root ball must rest on a pedestal of compacted subgrade. What we've put here is hand tamped native soil. So hand tamping is compaction of any of the soil that's under the root ball area. So what we would require there is some type of plate compaction or a jumping jack or even a compaction tool to make sure that the soil is somewhat of a pedestal. We do think that it should be native soil, so that's why we've left that there. And the other portion of that, I think we're editing note 1 that shows that where the root trunk collar should be. And other than that, I think that's every note that you guys had for us. So there's some things that the city feels like we want to continue to require just to protect the streets and protect the infrastructure within the streets. And then there's some things that we have found that other cities, so when we did this review, we went out and we looked at what other cities in the metro area are doing also. And we have an Excel spreadsheet of our detail comparison to other cities' details. Very generally, we're pretty close. Our 24-inch requirement is a little bit more stringent than the other requirements. But that's also because we are setting up a sidewalk program and we've had a couple issues with street tree roots being in the road and in utility facilities. So we're pretty adamant about that 24-inch. I talked to our construction crew and we do not feel like the 24-inch is any harder to come by than the 18-inch. So that's why we're pretty adamant about that. So that's where this is at. And then I have a outline of, sorry guys, let me stop sharing for a second. I have an outline of the comparison of how Oregon City aligns with other municipalities. Can you guys see the planner strip detail? Sorry, hold on, let me just pull them in. Can you guys see this? Yeah, okay. So as on the top here, this is Oregon City. This is the details that we looked at for each municipality, and then we outlined who's got the largest requirement, what that requirement is, and how we go about requiring, or who requires what. So our 2-inch caliper is one of the highest. I think Corvallis, and maybe, I think Bend may have had a 2-inch caliper too. And then our 24-inch root barrier depth is on the higher end. There is, Wilsonville also uses 24-inch. I don't think ODOT is a great comparison, but we use them to establish our standards. So that's why they're on here. Then the distance to the curb or the sidewalk, I think we're one of the few cities that are doing a sidewalk program to help alleviate some of these tree issues. So I think that's why we're being pretty adamant about that 12 inches, and also the subgrade compaction and the subgrade width of those compactions are in the 10 to 12 inch range outside of the curb and outside of the width of the road. So that's why we're at those 12 inches. The thickness of the root barrier really isn't always outlined on a bunch of the details. We're pretty adamant about the 0.08 because there's been a couple of times with the root barrier, I'm not sure that I think it's been installed and we've still had some issues. So we're trying to be pretty adamant about that thickness of not allowing issues within the sidewalk and the street. The width of the root ball is pretty much the same for everybody. Root crown height, depression, we're doing 1 inch. A lot of people use 1 inch or at grade. ODOT requires 2 inches, but they're generally fast or bigger roads and stuff like that. So I guess that's where that's at. We require stakes to be installed. Not every municipality requires stakes. And then street lights and fire hydrant distances and all of that is outlined in city code. And ours is a little more stringent than other cities. Some other cities don't even regulate that. But the issue here is that we have so much development and we don't want to plant a new street tree on top of a water line or on top of a sewer line. So we have the 15 feet from street lights to ensure that the lights or the streets are illuminated. The fire hydrants and any water lines are 5 feet. Intersections are 20 feet for sight distance issues. And then public utilities, all other public utilities like storm or sewer lines are 5 feet. And then we require 2 to 4 inches of mulch, which is typical. And the backfill we're silent on, but a lot of people use native soil. And that's why we put native soil on our compaction note for the pedestal to sit on the root, for the root ball to sit on the pedestal. So that gives you guys a little bit of an outline of the review of the notes that we're giving to planning at that last NRC meeting, and how Public Works as the houser or as the entity or division that houses these standards is incorporating your comments, and also incorporating your comments while also understanding the challenges that the development community has, but also the challenges that our operations crews have with, you know, maintaining those curbs, maintaining some of those sidewalks and some of those streets. So that's where that's at. Does anybody have any questions on that? Go ahead.
So I don't have a question, just a recommendation about the compaction. So based on the description, it sounds like they would just compact the center of the dig site, which would create kind of a bowl, potentially, just based on the word of the instruction. So it doesn't quite, I don't know if you could put another word or two that indicates a pedestal that lifts the ball a little bit up from the bottom of the hole, if that makes a little sense. So that
So
way
you
it's,
want aeration on the bottom of the root. That's
yeah, so that it
so
allows water to drain. Because if you create a bowl where you sit the ball, all the water is just going to sit at the very bottom and it could drown the roots. So then you're going to have a higher incidence of tree failure. So just that's why we have that pedestal to kind of lift it up out of the dig hole, out of the hole itself. So that way it's a little bit raised up and it allows a space for the water to drain and percolate into the soil below it and help the tree not drown.
okay. I see the drawing line now, kind of showing like a little hump on there. We weren't extremely clear on what you guys meant by pedestal of compacted subgrade. So what we did was just put a compacted subgrade there with like a little box.
Right.
But
so it can be compacted but it has to be like this little, like
lift.
he was trying to draw like a little hill.
Yeah, a little lift. I see that now.
So I think pedestal is a good example, but I don't know like if it's quite simple to describe. It's kind of like describing how to tie your shoes. It's easier to see than to write. So if there's a way to describe the compaction of a pedestal, a raised level of soil for the ball to sit on, and then but yet create like there's a trough, if you will, like around the pedestal that allows water to drain away from the root ball so it's not sitting in a basin. Because you can have compaction, but it could be like a bowl.
How deep, what type of lift is there? Like what type of lift, what type of lip are you looking for on the trough?
So like
is it 2 inches? Is it 8 inches? Like what?
So 8 inches is too much.
Okay, yeah.
So I would say 2 to 3 is good, just enough to provide a trough for the water to drain into away from the root ball. So that way the roots can unfurl and grow into the soil without being drowned by water. Because like a ball is a really good description of what it is. It's all tangled up and it has yet to expand and grow into the medium. But if you build a bowl, it'll drown.
Okay, and is there a certain size that this pedestal should be? Does it have to be 2 times the size of the root ball? Does it have to be the size
Just
of the root
the size
ball?
of the root ball.
The size of the root ball.
Yeah.
And so pretty much you're asking for a 2-inch circular size of the root ball hill with a trough around it so that water can infiltrate into the trough so that roots go towards the trough to grow downward.
Right. And I don't know if it's in there already, but the hole itself should be at least 2 times the size of the root ball, right? If that's, I'm just not seeing it, but it's probably there. So that way it will have that extra space, that trough to grow into. That's additional, that's basically another root ball volume of space for it to grow into, and then not drown. Because these are going to be watered fairly regularly, and then until they get a decent, establishment going on. So they're still pretty ball shaped after planting, but if they're in a bowl, they're going to drown. So that's why they want. So that's what Chris meant by pedestal.
Okay. I think I can probably figure out how to describe that, and we'll go from there. So 1 time, or the width of the root ball, the pedestal, the width of the root ball shall be constructed for the tree to be planted on, and it shall have a 2-inch trough around the outside to enable watering and root growth. So we'll figure, yeah, I can figure that out. That's
Yeah,
not a
I
big
don't know
deal.
if you want to talk about the trough too much, because if you make, it could make more work than necessary.
I mean,
Basically,
our main objective is to get as much tree canopy as possible without damaging city infrastructure or causing damage to like the community owner of the house. Like,
right.
so,
But you also want the tree to live, otherwise
yeah,
you're
yeah,
just
the
throwing
tree
money
canopy.
away, and people are like upset, why isn't my tree living? It could be
Yeah,
many reasons, but one reason could be it's drowning
it's
in
drowning.
the hole. So just a pedestal, you could just say, and that's like so high and it's so big, and you don't need to, I don't know if it's necessary to talk about
Say
how
about the
wide
trough.
that trough is, because it depends on the size of the tree, right? So
Mhm.
you can let the tree size kind of determine how big that pedestal is going to be and how much trough space is left over. So the trough is really just leftover hole that
Mhm.
is absent the
Yeah.
pedestal.
Yeah,
So yeah,
you're right. We could probably just describe the pedestal, and the trough will handle itself pretty much.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The other question I had for the standard was, we used to do all side root barrier, and that was in an effort to minimize any type of damage, because like it or not, on new development, trees are hard to fit in the planter space when there's driveways, there's sewer laterals, there's water laterals, there's hydrants, and there's streetlights. On each new development, there's all of those things, and in the past, we have placed root barrier. In the recent past, since 2018, when we updated this detail, we had placed root barrier on all sides of the trees. I haven't seen much damage occur because of that, but that is relatively new. So I don't, does the NRC have a staunch stance on why it shouldn't be placed on all sides?
Well, maybe we could put a rationale to it, because you're effectively shrinking the plant site by the root barriers, even though we've described it as 5 feet, right? Like that's what our list looks like, and that's what I inherited anyway. And so the expectation is that you got 5 feet to work in. In reality, you got 3 with the root barriers, right? And then so it's inaccurate to say you got 5 feet for a tree when actually you only got 3 for the root barriers. So it would be great to improve canopy, to get big trees in, to have bigger planting sites in general, and then have the root barriers within that, so that you have a wider space for the tree, instead of you have like a real 5 feet, meaning you've got a 7-foot strip, right, or something like that. So maybe we should talk later about the minimum sidewalk strips, because they're actually not 5 foot if you got root barriers a foot in from both the sidewalk and the curb. So yeah, and those 2.5 footers are really just 1 footers, or half footers, and in perspective of the tree. So so I guess I would say, like, if I had any voice, is to say, like, it would be great if our minimum strips were 8 feet, and that would mean we would actually have a real 5-foot planting space. And and that would then give more room for the infrastructure, and more space for all the other competing needs for the strips. But in terms of what you're asking about, we can install the root barriers for when they're needed, right? They're not needed if it's a 30-foot continuous strip and there's no sidewalk. Like, sometimes they have those entrances to developments that are like a block long. There's no strip, there's no driveways. It's just all one long entrance into the development. So in those cases, you don't necessarily need to box in the tree if you don't need to, right?
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to get a justification. I think we've already, like, just in general, I think we are saying that we will not require it on all sides anymore. So that should help it a little bit, but I just was trying to get a little bit of a justification on that, just to get your thought, the NRC's thought process on that. So I'm hearing you, and I think that the idea of the requirement of sizes is going to be a big task to take on. Those are written in city code and would have to go through a bunch of different reiterations to change. And I'm sure there's some other thought processes as to why they are the size that they are, including comments from the development world and comments from engineering and professionals on that. So I think that will be a hard change. What I do think may not be a hard change is the 12 inches off of the sidewalk. So if we're doing 5.5 feet, like you said, if we were to take 12 inches off of both sides, we are in retrospect doing 3 feet or 3.5 feet. So if we were to put the root barrier up against the sidewalk on the sidewalk side and still require it to be 12 inches from the curb side, just because of the amount of subgrade and stuff like that that is on the curb side, I think that we would be giving that tree 4 feet as opposed to 3.5 or 3 feet. So okay, I'll take that back and I'll talk to engineering about editing that portion of the standard to allow for that landscape zone to be as wide as possible. And I know
Can I
that.
ask a question?
Yes.
So is the canopy size affected then by the tree's ability to, by the root ball, I guess is what I'm getting at. Like if it goes from the 5 feet to the 3 feet, does that mean that tree is never really going to get to maturity? And so we end up with the smaller canopy.
Well,
Plus,
if you
might
got a
be
small
wanting
planting
to-
site,
Yeah,
then
you
you
might
will
want to
have a
plant
smaller
different
tree.
trees there. You might want to, we were looking at
Okay.
what trees went where as a 5-foot strip. And now if we're like, well, that's a 3-foot strip, then maybe we need to totally redo the tree strategy, because, a tree that has a 5-foot root area is going to be very different, can be much larger than a tree that only has a 3-foot root area, because you've got to have a decent root system to support a big tree. So if we want a decent sized canopy in Oregon City, we have to have some areas where we can plant bigger sized trees and know that the root systems are going to be enough to not only support the tree as it grows, but also to make sure it doesn't fall over in a windstorm because it's too small and it's too cramped in a little area.
And I guess that is part of what I would wonder from the engineering side, if they would be okay with that, moving the root barrier to the sidewalk and giving it a little bit more room. Because just a couple of thoughts. One, there are many benefits to having enhanced and larger tree canopy. Just livability in general, the heat dome, and just from last summer, we heard about different parts of Portland where it was insanely hotter than other parts. So I think that's part of what we need to consider. And then I think it's going to be extremely difficult to, this is my guess because I'm new to Oregon City, but I don't think we're going to be able to like get more from developers in terms of a larger landscape strip. But 5.5 feet sounds pretty dang good to me in terms of when new development comes in. So I guess I'm just trying to advocate for making the 5.5 feet work for as large of a tree canopy as we can get.
I think engineering is willing to move the root barrier to the sidewalk, right on the sidewalk side. I don't know that we would be open to moving it off of the curb just because of street and curb infrastructure. But again, like you asked, Aquila, like the bigger those roots are, the more healthy the canopy will be, the bigger the canopy will be. And if we look at city code, there are areas where that landscape strip is big enough. Like the arterials, we have 8 feet requirements. Like any type of new development on say Holcomb or any of the bigger streets would have to have that 8 foot requirement, and they would have to put in the bigger, more mature trees. And that it's I think we have to put it into perspective that it's the local roads on new developments that we're really trying to fit into a box where the tree is healthy, the canopy is great, the utilities work how designed, the sidewalk isn't going to cause issues with the community, and the tree lives forever and kids can play on the tree. Like that's what we really want. But it's finding the comment or the intersection of what can work there. And I think that there are some trees on the list that can work there, but we need to find the best way to plant those trees. Yeah.
I think if you can move that all the way up against the sidewalk, that would be like 4.5 feet,
Yeah.
which then I'm not as concerned about losing that foot as but if it goes from 5.5 to 3.5 foot, then we would, I think, really have to reconsider what the tree list was.
I can commit to bringing that up and discussing it and making sure Teresa knows what we'll be doing moving forward.
Great. Thank you for coming. Thank you for explaining that to you, because I really didn't understand that tree well thing very much.
So just a little background on how we do this. So all of the developments, they have a tree landscaping plan. That tree landscaping plan gets reviewed by planning, and that tree landscaping plan also gets reviewed by Public Works. Public Works reviews it for distances from streetlights and utilities and intersections, and planning reviews it for the land use agreement, which is where they outline how many street trees are required with the development. When those plans get approved, the contractor does all of the public improvements first. He builds all the utilities, builds all the roads, builds all the curbs, and builds the ADA ramps. After they have built all the public improvements, they are allowed to get building permits. Then they start building the houses. With each house, they have to build the sidewalk improvements they have to build the driveways, and they have to build the street trees. Generally, those contractors call in for the sidewalks and they call in for the driveways, but in the past, the city did not perform inspections for trees. Since we've had a lot of issues, and since we've been updating the street tree list in the last 2 years, we have been doing a street tree inspection at the 2-year maintenance period of each development. We go out and we probe each tree for root barrier, and we look at each tree's location with regards to intersections, utilities, and lights. In the very recent past, we have had one contractor have to remove like 60 trees and have to pay a fee in lieu on those trees because of the location of those trees and not complying with city code. And then we have in my inbox, I have another developer asking clarification on the standards and all of that. So that's just how the process gets done. The other issue there is that nobody, or in the past, nobody in the city was looking at the street tree type because we don't have a forester or anything like that on city payroll. So what we have been requiring lately is that when the developer installs their street tree or any tree that is on the landscaping plan, that they have to keep the tag on the tree until the city approves it. Sometimes that doesn't happen, sometimes it does happen, but we're trying to get by with engineers and inspectors that aren't trained in trees, reviewing inspection of trees. So that's like a whole picture of what the city goes through with trees and development.
Dante, did you want to say maybe just a little bit about the work you're doing with the tree well standard drawing?
Right. So there's 2 different types of trees, right? The trees that we put in landscape furniture zones that actually have grass and stuff that are growing around them. Those trees would follow the standard that we looked at, which is standard 530 that we reviewed. The other type of tree is a tree that goes in a tree well with a tree grate, and it is in like a commercial area, more like Main Street or Molalla. The city has a standard that we got approved for the Molalla Avenue streetscape design standards. Those design standards were reviewed by engineering and were approved, I think, by city commission, maybe. I'm not 100% sure on that. But what we're looking at is understanding how those trees are going to impact a completely sidewalked area, how we should plant those trees deeper and with grades and stuff like that. So we're reviewing all of that. We do have a standard that we do like. So we are looking to implementing another standard for street trees within concrete sidewalk areas that would use a grate, in addition to the street tree planting and planter strip standard. And we have a couple of those trees that have come down on Main Street later that we need to really iron out with the owners of those properties.
Yeah, I know there's a few. I live right off of 7th, and there's trees that, well, they get hit by cars quite frequently. So they don't last a long time. They don't have really long lifespans for a number of reasons, but Yeah, they're essentially just in a big planter box for the most part.
Yeah, but Main Street's one of those areas where we do want the big canopy, like where we do believe that, you know, it's definitely advantageous for the city to have a pretty lifestyle and a pretty, you know, walk through there. So like we're trying to make sure that we're, you know, ensuring that the root ball has enough width, ensuring that the root ball has, you know, like Samantha said, I don't know if it has a pedestal or not, because I don't know that standard off the top of my head, but that's all of those things we're trying to ensure that the detail incorporates. So that's just, those are backgrounds to where we're at. I don't know how John feels, but I think that there's some trees on the street tree list that we are going to be okay with. I think John and the Public Works Department are a little hesitant about saying recommended street trees for 2.5 to 3 foot planting strips. And
I'm wondering
I think what we heard from the NRC is that you guys are a little hesitant for 2.5 to 3 foot planting strips also.
Yeah, I'm wondering if maybe we should just say nothing below 3 feet, 3 feet and above, and get rid of the 2.5 to 3.
Or we could say 2.5 to 3 per location recommendations. Like if somebody really like has to have a tree in their 2.5 to 3, like we can go out and say, you're too close to an intersection, or your tree's gonna flood, or your tree's not gonna be able to maintain itself. You're better off planting it in your front yard. Or is there another location with the city where we can accommodate each other together, you know?
Yeah.
The code right now allows for planting a tree. Maybe you already know this, but for planting a tree on private property, if you can't fit it there. To me, the barrier with that is then the property owner is required to record a covenant. And if it's me, like, I'm not going to do that.
So I had a question about that, where the NRC might be able to help with the covenant. So it sounds like the covenant's like under $100. Is that right?
I don't know the cost.
It sounded like it was under 100, but we have like some leftover. I don't know if we spent or allocated all the funding from that $200 that we got from that grant. If we had any leftover from the tree maintenance allocation, maybe we can put it into like this grant for covenants in these small sites. So it would just be like, there's a lot of caveats. Like, do you have a small site? You want to plant a tree? Let's do a covenant. And if you want to do a covenant, the NRC will review an application and provide a grant to cover the cost of the covenant. That way we can kind of encourage people to move out of the too small planting strip, and they can do the planting in a better site, have a wonderful tree, it'll live, less headaches. Would that be something we can look at? Because if it's $100,
we could. So I'm not familiar with the grant that you're referring to. So we could look into the budget and see what's there and maybe bring something back to you. I'm curious. So I don't know the process of recording a covenant, but I think that the process of it may be the barrier more so than the cost.
I don't think it's the cost that's the barrier. I think it's the homeowner on their title will now have a covenant recorded that requires that tree to be on their property for the remaining time period of that property. And if they want to sell that house, or if they want to do anything with that house, that tree has to remain. And I don't know that many people like to just record something on their title. I think many people look at it like a lien to some sort, to some extent. I agree that a tree covenant is not a lien, and it's not like anything that should go against your title. But I do think that that's what people feel, just because it's a process, it's money, and it's something that the city is mandating over them.
Yeah, I think
Well,
people do
yeah.
it for heritage trees, but I think that's
Yeah, for
because
heritage
heritage
it's-
trees are very different, and people
Yeah.
really treasure that tree, whereas you're just
Sure.
planting a tree. You know, and my concern about putting it where if you're interested in planting a tree in under 3 feet, who would you get a hold of? I mean, the problem with not having a city forester or a city arborist or anybody is that there's nobody, you know, do we have them come to us? I mean, we could, but you know, that seems like, you know, we're not the city, so.
Right. Well, it's just an idea to make it much more streamlined and, you know, less of a barrier so that people that, like you say, it sounds like they exist, they're really adamant that they want a tree there. But
Right,
if it's not a good site, we can make the barrier less prohibitive, and we can do the education of it's not a lien, it's a covenant. It's like stewardship that they have to do anyway for any tree that goes in. So, so I feel like there's some reasonable concern about, you know, recommending it in a broad stroke, but for these really tiny sites, I agree with John and with Dante that they're really not suitable for any sort of canopy tree as
yeah.
much as we would want them to be. But if there are residents that really want to do a covenant, but for one reason or another, they don't understand or it's expensive, then I feel like the NRC and the city can do things to be more transparent, provide some support. So that's all I was trying
I mean,
to
we could put in there,
go
if you're
towards.
interested, you know, contact the NRC.
Yeah, they can call me
and
and I'll come
we'll-
look at their tree.
Yeah, I'll
Get me
look
out of my
at the trees.
house. I'm
So-
here all day.
I was out measuring heritage trees a while ago.
Aquila, I have a question, because I vaguely remember on building permits after the development is approved, there still is some review for on-site landscaping and on-site trees, correct? Like
Right.
there's still some requirements for on-site trees that each individual lot owner has to plant, correct? Is that,
So
you guys?
I don't know the specifics of the code yet, but whatever their landscape plan showed in their land use review, that's what has to be planted on the private side, and that does get reviewed before a building is finalized.
Does that review on the private side, is that taken into account for street trees, or is street trees a specific number based on what city code says? Like,
Yeah,
is there,
yes.
there's a frontage amount, right, in
Yeah.
city code, and we say that frontage has to
For-
have 12 street trees in it or whatever?
Yeah, it's
right?
like 1 for every 35 feet.
Okay, so there's no way in planning review that if the planter strip is 2.5 to 3, we couldn't exempt the street trees out of there and require them to be put on private property at that point.
Well, so
Sorry,
The-
I know that's a lot.
no, I'm just, I don't know if those processes kind of line up. So like if we've got a new subdivision coming in where they're going to be required to plant street trees, they're also going to be required to have a 5.5-foot planter strip. But if it's an existing lot, and I don't know, let's say it was a tear down or something built in 1996, they tear it down and rebuild a new house. I don't actually know our processes. I don't know if we would look at that single family home as a land use and say, with this new home, you're required to replant the planting strip. I don't know that part.
We would. So what would
Okay.
happen is that they would submit for building permits, and the BRESI permit, which is the building residential permit that the city has, the BRESI permit would kick a review to engineering, and engineering would say there needs to be a street tree, there needs to be a driveway, there needs to be this from intersections. So maybe it's a talk with Josh about internal BRESI review, and if that can be exempt from the street tree somehow, to place this tree on private property. Like in McLaughlin, for instance, where, like, let's say on like 16th or something, where there's some infill lots that haven't, there's in geohazard or something, so somebody hasn't built them. If they were to get built, we would get a geohazard review, and then we would also get a review of that lot for driveway, the utility connection, and a street tree. So I think I would have to talk to Josh, because you're right, on new development, we're getting 5.5. So that rarely happens.
Right. And I don't know, maybe there's some more brainstorming we could do, because it seems like where there's a 2.5 to 3 foot planter strip, if they want to take their street tree out or need to take it out, I don't know why they couldn't replace it on the private property, and just, I don't know why that would have to actually be recorded with a covenant, like, because it could just be almost like a math calculation, right? Like, you have this much frontage, you would be required to have this many street trees, but you don't have a big enough planter strip. So we need to see this many trees somewhere on your lot.
To produce the amount of canopy that one
Right. If
tree
that's
would
our ultimate
produce.
goal, is the
Yeah.
canopy, then could we do something like that?
Yeah, is it easy enough to get around the covenant so that people don't feel like they're recording something on their title, and we are getting the canopy that we want?
Right.
Especially in the 2.5 to 3, which is, I mean, we could get GIS to probably run some type of query on where 2.5 to 3 is within the city.
That's my question, is how many places is it really that small? I mean, I know a few
McLaughlin.
places. I live in McLaughlin. I'm walking all the time now. I'm looking at everybody's like, well, that's about 3. I mean, mine's only like 3 to 4. Mine's not that big, but yeah, now I'm just like looking all at I know there's a few places, but I don't know a lot. So
I mean, there's a lot of areas that don't have sidewalk either, like the Claremont area, they don't have any sidewalks. So
I don't have a sidewalk in front of my house, and they just repaved the house, and
yeah,
there's a sidewalk across the street, and they decided not to put a sidewalk on my side because there's too many things. Like, I've got trees planted in there that I didn't plant. The county actually planted them. So
so you're living what we're
there's too many obstacles, and they go, good. I don't want a sidewalk.
You're living what we're talking about. Too many obstacles.
Yeah.
Hey, Aquila,
Yeah.
I do kind of foresee some code changes needed on this topic, right? Because there is, still, I mean, I don't know that we have any of these, but is there infill development, or is there redevelopment, let's say a partition in an area that's got, these existing planter strips that could come up? I agree, that's probably unlikely to happen in a big way, but So, but I think the code changes, there's a couple, I think the code requires a 2-inch caliper tree as well. And I think we've been allowing, I've seen, I'm assuming they're permitted. It's hard to know anymore, but just, you know, based on the spacing, I assume that folks are getting permits and planting trees. And in my neighborhood, not the development that was in my neighborhood, but a neighboring one that it feels like my neighborhood, but it's a few years older. Again, narrow planter strips, and they're putting trees in again, and they're small, but they look like 1-inch caliper trees or something. So that caliper change needs to happen. I am 100% in agreement with you on the, and I feel like this has been a bit of a battle, and so some of your existing or longer term staff you might check in with, but I've had such a, I mean, that's always been my frustration, is most of the time people want trees, right? They want to plant a tree. You ask them to put, and I'm one of these, you asked me to put a covenant on that tree. There's no way I'm going to be doing that, right? So because it's got a future impact in it, and who knows what could happen, you know, at some point in time, you may want to remove that tree because it's damaging your house, or, you know, whatever. To me, just the covenant has always been a frustration, because I'd gladly, and in fact I did in my case, plant a tree behind the sidewalk in a spot where there was a tree between two driveways in a planter strip that was maybe, I don't know, 5 feet long, narrow, you know, and it just made no sense to have a tree there. Plus there was 2 water meters in that same box, right? So, but I was willing to put a tree back there, but I was not at all going to give any covenant for that. So, so anyway, I just, not to point out how I haven't been following our own code, but I just think that it's flawed. And so,
what's your address, John?
Yeah. I would love to see that changed, because I think it's discouraging trees that will in the long term be the tree that we really want. It's not going to get cut down in, you know, 12, 15, 17 years or whatever, you know. So I wish we could fix that and change that.
And if
There's
it's in a
this,
yard,
I do find there's
yard,
this
bigger.
There's this belief that, you know, the people are just ready to cut down trees, and I don't think that exists. You know, obviously there are some people that'll cut down a tree because it's messy, right, or those kind of things. But again, if we got the right tree list, you know, it's either messy or it's a hazard tree, or, you know, or it's you know, they're concerned about it, right? They remove trees because of that, but they generally aren't wanting to do that. Often because it's costly, right? It's not easy to remove a full-size tree without spending a fair amount of money on it. So I just think this belief that the only way you're going to get to keep that tree is if you put a covenant on it. I don't think that's true. Anyway, we've been all over the board tree, so you're not managing our meeting.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
Well,
good.
we've been
good
doing old
information.
business. We just keep going back and forth between the same 2 things. So, and
Well,
they go
I think-
together so much, it's hard not to. So
Absolutely.
I
So
don't know.
going back to the drawing.
I don't know if there's enough of us to actually make a recommendation to just get rid of the 2.5 to 3 foot tree list and go with what we have for the 3 feet up. I think we're still okay with trees in those areas. Sam, do we want to review those again, given but again, new developments are going to be 5.5 feet. So we're not talking about putting tree wells necessarily in to the places where it's only, unless it's infill or something. So I agree with you guys in terms of if we can re-examine the code so that if it is too small for a tree, give them the option of planting a tree in their yard. I was reading somewhere that somebody was doing that. I don't know, maybe it was Portland that was doing that, where it was, you had an option to plant it in your yard. And I don't remember saying there was a covenant on it. So
Yeah, we think Portland does not require a covenant. They weren't doing that so much in the residential, but that was something that was pretty common in the commercial zones that had the narrow planter strips or curb tight sidewalks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nancy, I think the city's thought process isn't get rid of trees in the 2.5 to 3 inches. I think it's not to outright recommend a tree in the 2.5 to 3 inches. I think what we want is trees in the 5.5 foot area, because that's what's going to allow the tree to grow a nice root ball and a nice canopy. In the 2.5 to 3 foot area, these trees that Samantha has put together, I've looked through all of them, and they seem like viable trees. Even in a 5 foot planter area, they all seem like viable trees. It's just, what else are we causing issues with in the 2.5 to 3 foot area? And instead of recommending a tree to be placed there, we need to look at each one of those areas a little bit deeper to ensure that it's safe, ensure that the tree will survive, and ensure that the community is getting the canopy that it wants. And all of those things can either be addressed by not having a covenant and putting them on private property, or even having a covenant and putting them on private property, having a condensed list of 2.5 to 3 planter strip or trees in the planter strip. So like this list has a solid 15 options. I mean, I don't know that all of those should be considered, especially like the 30 foot or 35 foot and the 25 foot canopy ones, just because it's so sight distance, stuff like that in that area. Like uprights are probably a lot better than rounded oval umbrellas and stuff like that in those areas, depending on where you're at. So I think what the city is asking is for the NRC to ask does the NRC feel like a recommendation should be made between the 2.5 to 3, or if we can say something like, when replanting in the 2.5 to 3 planting areas, these 5 trees should be considered because of safety issues, and the city will look at each site per what is outlined at each site. So that's kind of what we want in the 2.5 to 3 area.
Either that or don't have any.
Either that or don't have anything.
Just, I would say maybe start by, these are the trees we recommend. Start with the 3 foot, but have a disclaimer before that. If you're interested, if you have a less than 3 foot wide planting area and would like to put a tree in there, maybe contact the NRC or contact somebody in the city. I just don't know who to tag with contacting, since we don't have a city forester. That's who we need. But without that, I mean, we could have them just contact us, and then we can talk about, how far away they are from curbs and from, major things, and have a very small list of potential trees.
I mean, for every tree that's going to be removed in the 2.5 to 3, the homeowner, unless they don't get a permit, they will have to go into planning and get a tree removal permit, and planning will outline what they have to replace. So at that point, maybe planning says to the homeowner, how big is your planting strip? This planting strip the city has deemed as a potential issue in the future. Please contact NRC, or please contact Public Works or the forester or whoever we eventually get on that.
Do we want to come back with the GIS representation of how much property this really could involve? I don't have a good idea of how many places this might come up, and that might help us decide how far we want to go with it. I don't know, unless you guys already have a good handle on it's these segments and this is how often it'll come up. It might be good to come back with a map to say, okay, this is how much area we're talking about. And that might help frame where we go for the next step for those 3 feet or less.
Yeah.
It would be good to have an inventory that we don't have an inventory that
Okay.
would be good, probably a good project. There is something to be said for, we've got a map of each subdivision, right? So we've got like a shape file for each subdivision. And, you could by subdivision assume, that they approved them with 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, planter strips. But based on the year, right? I mean, because we haven't been doing that for a while. So that might get you close, but I don't know. Other than that, I think it'd be, I've looked at our area photos. They're not really great about figuring out that, but Chris, it'd be worth the conversation with Chris Dunlop to see if he has any idea, but I think it's a pretty big effort. But as we kind of build these layers and build that inventory, he might have a plan for it. So it'd be worth a conversation.
I think what could potentially happen from my knowledge of GIS is GIS could potentially put the shape files for the edge of the pavement and then the shape files for the property lines and get the area between the edge of pavement and the property line, but that would still include the sidewalk. So we'd have to understand what the size of the sidewalk would be in each one of those areas. The other thing would be doing it manually, and that would take a long time. So it's either historical, manual, or mathematical through shape files that could potentially be wrong because of sidewalk sizes and differences in sidewalk sizes. So, I'm of the opinion so I live in the city and I drive the city multiple times daily. And I think that most of the areas where it's 2.5 to 3 are the older historical areas. I do not think that there is any new development that is 3 or less. Even the developments on Pease Road, which were in the 2012s, 2010s, like those are still 5 feet, I believe. Maybe not, though. So I don't know, John, we'll talk about logistics behind that because that's a kind of a big lift.
I mean, it would seem that if we make the replanting in anything less than 3 feet voluntary, if the applicant or if the property owner really wants to, then we could get rid of the covenant because that's enforcing a requirement, right? So if we make it a voluntary planting, and then that also, because I think it's easy to say put it on the property, but I don't really know what your historical setbacks are, and so I don't know, spatially between the house and the sidewalk, how often that's going to be feasible. So maybe moving towards something that's a voluntary option for the applicant or the property owner versus prescribing that they have to do that in those instances is the way to think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we could bring back are just some various options, like some that could result in different language, code language, and along with whatever we can find from GIS on the planting strip size. So, because I get when I suggested that in my mind, it was kind of anywhere on the site.
Mm.
And just make it like a math problem.
Oh.
But that those are different things that we could present for consideration.
The argument against voluntary is we're minimizing the required canopy.
Sure.
And that's, I'm sure there's going to be people both on the NRC and in city commission meetings that are going to be pretty adamant about the canopy size.
Sure.
So,
But if it's just the 2.5 to 3 feet, that's not that much area. And if those don't support trees very well anyway,
and it's,
it's
Yeah.
kind of a moot point. And if you did put a tree in there, it's going to have to be pretty small. So,
Right. So we can come back with some options like Aquila said, and I think Dante, you were going to go back and make some edits to the drawing for us to bring back to the group for the next meeting. And hopefully Chris will be able to be here for that.
yeah, open.
So those sound like 2 next steps I heard. Is there anything, is there another?
we were
The
hoping,
tree list, I guess. maybe.
yeah, we were hoping that the NRC would either look at the word recommended or look at not requiring making the tree in the 2.5 to 3 a voluntary type thing. Both because of the infrastructure, but also because of if the tree is placed somewhere else on that private property, the canopy of that tree will be much better than in a 2.5 to 3 foot planter strip.
Right, we'd have to come up with some wording
Yeah,
to talk about that, like contact us and we'll see if there's some place where we can find a tree that would be appropriate for that planter strip or planted on your property, you know, in a place that'll thrive. So
yep.
do you want to, Sam, do you feel comfortable moving that, or should we just wait and come up with some language for the next meeting and hopefully have more members present than just the 2 of us making decisions for everybody?
I think it's fine. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think we need a quorum to defer and continue editing.
Yeah. Yeah.
My impression was the city commission was really eager to see a list sooner than later, but I'm happy to keep whittling away. If there was a better recommendation or a clear concern about what is wrong with the word recommended, just so I know where to go or where to avoid, so I don't pick an even worse word.
We just don't want the city community to come back to the maintenance or the sidewalk program and continue causing issues on something that we are saying is recommended. So if we say these are the recommended trees within 2.5 to 3 feet, then we want to be very clear that these trees will not cause any issues for the homeowners, because they come back to us and say, you recommended this tree. Why do I have to, why is it damaging all my utility infrastructure and costing me 10 grand now? And I need to, the blame should be on the city because you recommended this tree. While I think what we're all acknowledging is that no tree should be recommended between 2.5 and 3 feet on a planter street. So what we want is
Just
more
for
of
that
a
strip.
suggestion. Yeah, just for that strip.
Because
the other
if you
trees are recommended. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes,
I just feel like if you put any tree in the ground, it's
gonna cause an issue maybe.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But the 2.5 to 3 is very, like, the likelihood of it causing issues is a lot higher than planting a crepe
crepe
A flat pancake.
myrtle in an 8-foot. I should know that because I'm from the South and crepe myrtles
That's
are
okay.
a big thing.
No,
Yeah.
okay. I just want to
Yeah.
make sure we're not like, because I feel like if we make a list at all, people will be like, but you have a list. This is your recommendation. So that's my concern. If like, if the concern is that they're going to come back because of a word, they're going to come back because we have a list. Yeah, right. So like, where do we want to really focus our energy versus what reality is going to bring us? Like, we can never really know.
Well,
So
and the wording might get affected by some of these code language options. You know what I'm saying? Because if we're going to go a route of not requiring, I guess what I'm hearing just frankly is that we could be going a route of not requiring a street tree in the planter strip if it's less than 3 feet.
Right.
And so if we have a species list and we have a section in there for planter strips that are 3 feet and smaller, the language may be something like options for a planter strip that is 3 feet and smaller, something like that. So the
Voluntary
language on the
planting.
list might get influenced by how the code is eventually what it ends up looking like. So
okay, options. We'll go with that.
But Samantha, the line there is 3 feet and below, right? So at 4 to 5.5 feet, the city is recommending trees.
Okay. Thank you for being clear.
The city is recommending trees, and we will require those trees to be installed by the standard, which is what we're reviewing.
Okay.
So the other trees, we don't want to recommend one. We want that to be kind of voluntary because we have had a lot of issues in that area, and the probability of getting an issue in that area is a lot higher than in an 8-foot strip or a 10-foot strip.
Where we have very different trees listed.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But still a crepe myrtle would work in an 8-foot strip too, you know, like, and it would be beautiful and probably be taller than it would ever be in a 3-foot strip, you know? So.
I have a question.
Yes.
Real quick. It's not related to street tree list, but it's street tree adjacent. Can I mention it, or is there still more discussion to go on about the street tree list?
We can go to communications. I think we've kind of hammered street trees and tree wells to the ground for tonight. So yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is Arbor Day and Tree City USA. So I sent a whole bunch of information to Teresa in her request for my street tree list, and I gave her more homework. There's a grant for Arbor Day celebrations through Oregon Community Trees that you only get access to if you're a Tree City USA, which we are, but you have to go to them to get the form, and it's due like very soon. So I'm hoping that we can get a hold of that and fill it out. But the other thing is we also have to make sure we are rededicating ourselves as a Tree City USA, and that had a deadline of last
It was the
December.
December 5th. Yeah, and that got submitted.
Yay,
Yeah,
thank you. I was
that's
so
done.
really
So
worried.
one thing I can tell you, yeah, that's taken care of. I'm sorry I didn't email you directly, but yeah.
Okay,
Good.
Yep.
super. I didn't want to be put on the delinquent. There's a list. We know who's who, and we know who falls off the list. And I didn't want to be on that list because, I mean, there's no shaming that goes on, but it's like there's a round of frowns when that happens. So I'm glad we're still on the list. But then that means we have access to grants to support any Arbor Day celebration, which are a requirement for a Tree City USA dedication. So I just want to remind everybody that these deadlines have come and are coming up so that we don't miss out.
That'd be good.
And you may have put it in your email, but do you have the deadline for the submittal for the grant for the celebration for the Arbor Day?
I don't.
Okay.
I asked about it and they said it was all very hush hush. So You gotta, I was the president of Oregon Community Trees, and just to give you the sense of the delineation between leading the group and grant access, there was a big wall. I have absolutely no influence
Okay,
on grants.
that is my homework. I will look into that.
So, but they're very friendly and they're very eager to be supportive. And they also have a list of possible activities that would be appropriate for the grant. So you don't need to dream up your own. But it would be a good opportunity to kind of be engaging on this topic in a positive city-led way. So that way it's not all about, responding to emergencies and falling trees. It's about rebirth, rebuilding, and so on. So yeah.
Excellent. Great.
I
you.
have I basically got an email from Dee Dee Dalsrud, who was, she was on the committee for years, and she was our heritage tree hero last year. And she is throwing support for Dara Kramer to get the heritage tree hero for this year. And if you don't know her, she works up at Gardner Middle School, and she's adopted this huge old white oak that's up on the school property. And she's really pushing to get that nominated to be a heritage tree. And so Dee Dee wanted to know if we were willing to throw our support behind Dara as in terms of getting that award. And I certainly am. So maybe I'll write something up really brief, just saying that, we support her and get that sent on.
I think that one has a due date. So I'm also on the Oregon Heritage Tree.
Yes, I know you are.
So for the benefit of everybody else. So 2 award programs, the Oregon Heritage Tree one, recognizing people, leadership, advocates for heritage trees across the state. So that this sounds like a good opportunity to recognize another local citizen. And there's another award opportunity for general urban and community forestry, advocates, leaders, professionals, developers. So maybe John or Dante, if you know of any good developers in Oregon City that are particularly, showing leadership in preserving, making space for urban canopy. Developers don't get that often recognized. We had one last year and they were doing really good work down in Corvallis. So maybe if we see some really excellent work being done on the development side in recognition of either preserving or making space for urban forestry, that would be an excellent opportunity to as well. So yeah, so let me know if you find if you have any ideas. I can forward the award opportunity from Oregon Community Trees, and I can also forward information for the Oregon Heritage Tree Hero. So it's a good PR thing to do.
And Sam, I may connect with you offline a little bit just to get a little bit more information as I get, ramp up my knowledge on the program. So I may reach out just offline a little bit for that.
Does anybody else have anything important to say?
John, did you want me to touch on the forester position?
Oh, yeah, urban forester, that'd be good.
Can
Do
you,
you know anything?
yeah, I'm gonna have to sign off here, but yeah, I'm happy to do that. I just maybe make it short.
So we're looking at the urban forester position. We're still trying to figure out funding and all of that good stuff from the city commission. But what I have done is I have done a search for through all of the US for good language as to what we would want the urban forester to be part of and be running within our community. A lot of it would be new street trees in development, and a lot of it would be the ownership of the detail, ownership of Tree City USA required requirements, establishing a community program that would, like you said, with all those grants, would establish a healthy canopy. So all of those things are being considered.
Maybe tree inventory.
Yeah, a tree
We do not have a tree
inventory.
inventory, and we desperately need one.
So
Dante, I would suggest that you reach out to the ODF Urban and Community Forestry Program. This is like the experts in this field, and this is like their passion, and they're very knowledgeable not only of statewide standards of, or outlines of job descriptions, but also national. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. I would recommend.
you
Kristen
have a,
Romstad. Yeah,
so
I
I'm
can.
gonna give you my email, and if you can email me any type of, so it's, I don't have a chat, so can I just say it to you? It's D.
Sure.
So it's D like my first name and then my last name as it's spelled. Like
Posadas? How do you pronounce your last name?
Posadas.
Posadas. Thank you.
Yeah, it's D Posadas at orcity.org, and feel free to send me any type of question or anything that you need. I'm available generally and willing to help. So yeah, that's where that's at. We don't have a complete tree inventory. What we do have is a mapping of most of the trees. There is a number of how many trees we have in the city. I have all that data. And there is a estimated tree canopy in acres that we have gotten from our GIS coordinator. So I'm working on, I've pretty much got all the historical and background stuff of the city already dialed in on the job description. And I've got what I think Public Works would want the urban forester to be doing down, but I still need to share that with community development and with our parks department, because we do feel like the urban forester would have a lot to say within the parks, and there's a lot of heritage trees within the parks that we were looking to be able to maintain in an appropriate way. Water board, some of the parks in Kenema, the Newell parks, and I know Newell Creek's a metro park, but still, there's still heritage trees within the urban growth boundary that we believe the urban forester would have some type of say in. So all of that's in the works. I did commit to giving John an email last week, which I have not done because I am busy, but I promise that I'll get something to him this week, and I'll CC Aquila and Teresa in it so that they're purview for the next meeting that you guys have.
Great. I hope you can come next time. They're a great addition.
Yeah, I think I found a replacement.
You can come too, John.
Right.
Who are you going to talk about trees with? You should always come. We love it having you here.
His disclaimer to begin is, I don't know anything about trees. I think that's what I heard. That's what I heard is his introductory line. Hi, I'm John Lewis, and I don't know anything about trees.
That's okay.
I love hang out here too long, you'll find stuff out.
I guess my shameless plug to Nancy and Sam is if you know of anybody that might be interested, we did have some difficulty getting applicants for the 2 seats that are open. So
I think putting on the site that we actually have vacancies would be
that is my first step tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of people in the city, and I'm trying to think of, there was a person who applied for for this commission, the last time, my husband's walking through to get something. The last time that we elected people a year ago, I believe, or maybe it was 2 years ago, but we had, I think we had 4 applicants for 3 positions, and you know, the person who got selected, who's great, but the other person I thought was just as great. I mean, I could have gone either way. So,
Okay.
you know, I keep thinking I should go back in the minutes, but I can't ever, our minutes aren't online because, you know, we don't have a secretary, so we're way behind in getting minutes up.
Right.
But if I could find that person's name, it'd be worth approaching her again. And there was a person who came to the meeting several months ago. He was from Kenema, and he was really interested in doing something about the ivy on the trees to help save the tree canopy. And I'm like, we should talk to him to see if he would want it, because those are the people who I think would be really good to add to the committee. So, but
Did Carrie have any interest in reapplying?
no, she said she was going to step away, mostly because of family.
Okay.
She's just, yeah,
Okay.
I think she just felt like she was being pulled in too many places. So, which
Sure.
I understand. So,
Okay. Okay.
okay. Does anybody have anything else to say? I'm losing my voice. Okay, I will call this meeting adjourned, and I will see some of you, probably all of you, at some point in like at least a month. So,
Right.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Good
Thank you
night.
guys.